The Karoo Desert stretched endlessly beneath the harsh South African sun, a barren expanse where stunted bushes huddled among red sand and gray rock. August 17, 2047, began like any other day, quiet, with only the whistle of wind through the mountain crevices and the distant cry of a hawk. But at 8:43 a.m., the sky trembled. A sound like rolling thunder erupted, not from the clouds but from above, higher, deeper. Nearby villagers looked up, shielding their eyes from the sun, and then they saw it, a massive black shape, hundreds of meters long, tearing through the atmosphere with a trail of crimson fire. It descended, slow but unstoppable, like a god felled from the heavens. Dr. Amara Ndlovu was in her makeshift office at the South African Astronomical Observatory, 200 kilometers from the Karoo. When the news broke, her computer flashed alerts as radar detected an unidentified object hurtling into the atmosphere at an unnatural speed. Amara, 35, with short, curly hair streaked gray from stress, shoved her chair back and rushed outside. She stood on the rooftop, hands shading her brow, gazing toward the horizon. A white streak of smoke slashed across the sky, followed by a deafening boom that shook the building. The ground beneath her quivered, as if the earth itself groaned under the impact. Amara, Thabo Quavadas, her assistant, burst out of the lab, eyes wide with excitement. "Did you see it? It crashed in the Karoo. The government just called. They want you there now." Amara nodded, her heart pounding. She'd spent her life studying the cosmos, obsessed with the stars ever since her father, a fellow astrophysicist, died in a rocket explosion when she was 12. In his final days, he'd told her, "The universe holds answers, Amara, you just have to dare to ask." Now, it seemed an answer had landed right in front of her. Within hours, Amara and Thabo were at the crash site, escorted by a South African military team. Their helicopter touched down a kilometer away, close enough to feel the lingering heat in the air. Before them loomed a ship. No. A masterpiece, gigantic, at least 400 meters long and as tall as a 50-story building. Its hull had once gleamed, but now it was scarred and dented, as if it had endured an unrelenting battle. A massive door, twice Amara's height, yawned open on one side, both inviting and ominous. "Look at this," Thabo whispered, pointing to the red dust coating the hull. "No footprints, no tracks. Whoever flew it here left nothing behind." Amara didn't reply immediately. She stepped closer, her boots sinking into the soft sand. The military team, armed with rifles and flashlights, had cordoned off the area, but they let her explore freely. She was the only expert in the country qualified to understand this thing. When she touched the hull, it was icy cold despite its fiery descent through the atmosphere. A strange sensation prickled up her spine, as if the ship were alive, but sleeping. "We're going in," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Thabo nodded, though he was visibly nervous. The military assigned 2 soldiers to accompany them, but Amara waved them back at the entrance. "If there's danger, I want to face it first." Inside, the corridors were pitch black, illuminated only by faint purple streaks running along the walls, emanating from unseen slits. The air carried an odd scent, like cinnamon mixed with scorched metal, but Amara's device confirmed it was breathable. The walls towered twice human height, curving into an arch, suggesting the ship's crew wasn't human. Thabo raised his flashlight, revealing a dust-covered control panel etched with symbols unlike any earthly language. "Amara, over here," Thabo called from deeper in the corridor. She hurried over and found him holding a small, silver disc the size of a palm. When he touched it, it glowed, projecting a holographic display into the air. The symbols spun, shifted, then settled into English, not perfect, but legible. Vessel ZYLARA-7. Irreparably damaged. Abandoned per protocol. Amara read aloud, her voice trembling. "They call themselves Kateseth. This is their final log." Thabo frowned. "Kateseth? Who are they? And why leave something like this behind?" Amara didn't answer right away. She glanced around, her eyes tracing the empty corridors and silent machinery. Memories of her father surfaced. He'd spoken of distant civilizations, of how they might surpass humanity by millennia. But if they'd abandoned this ship, why? Were they too advanced to care? Or unable to fix it? Maybe they thought it was useless. She said slowly, running her hand over the control panel's surface. But to us, this isn't junk, it's an opportunity. That night, as the sun dipped below the Karoo horizon, Amara stood alone outside the ship, staring up at a sky full of stars. The military had set up temporary tents, their floodlights bathing the massive vessel in an ethereal glow, turning it into a monument amid the sand. Tabo had returned to the helicopter to report, but Amara couldn't leave. She felt an inexplicable connection to this thing, not just scientific curiosity, but a promise she'd held onto for years. She recalled the nights her father had shown her constellations, telling her of a day when humanity would reach them. He'd died before seeing that dream come true. But now Amara stood before a ship from those very stars. It had been discarded, deemed worthless, but she didn't believe that. She'd never believed anything was truly useless, not if you knew how to see it. "We'll make it work," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to her father, herself, or the ship. "They left it because they thought it was useless. But we'll prove them wrong." The desert wind swept past, carrying red dust that clung to her boots. Under the moonlight, the Zylara-7, or whatever name humanity would give it, stood silent, waiting. And Amara knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Junkyard Dreamers. 3 days after the Zylara-7 crashed into the Karoo Desert, the desolate landscape had transformed into a bustling hub of activity. White military tents sprouted like mushrooms across the South African wilderness. Floodlights bathed the massive ship in a relentless glow all night, and the hum of machinery echoed through the dry air. Dr. Amara Ndlovu stood at the ship's main entrance, clutching a digital tablet, her eyes fixed on the strange contours of its hull. She hadn't slept much since arriving, but adrenaline kept her sharp. This wasn't just a scientific endeavor, it was the dream of her lifetime. Perhaps of all humanity. Tabo Quavadas jogged up to her, his engineer's jacket streaked with red dust. "Amara, the UN just got back to us," he said, breathless. "They're funding it, but there's a catch, it has to be an international effort. They're sending people from all over." Amara nodded, unsurprised. Something like the Zylara-7 couldn't stay South Africa's secret alone. Still, a flicker of unease stirred in her. More people meant more opinions. And she wasn't sure she was ready to share her vision yet. "Who's coming?" she asked. "A military pilot from Germany, Colonel Elias Voss," Tabo replied, glancing at his tablet. "And a biotech engineer from Peru, Lina Torres. They'll be here in 48 hours. Amara frowned. A pilot and a biotech engineer? Not the usual picks for a spaceship. But she had no time to second guess if they were going to turn this heap of scrap into something that could fly. She needed the best minds, no matter where they came from. Colonel Elias Voss stepped off the military helicopter 2 days later, his gray-blue eyes scanning the desert with a cool detachment. At 42, he carried the air of a man who'd seen too much, short hair flecked with silver. A sharp-featured face bearing faint scars from his days as a fighter pilot. Elias had once been a star in the German Air Force, leading a squadron through perilous missions. But 4 years ago, a failed operation in the Arctic had claimed his entire team. A miscalculation on his part had sent their planes crashing, leaving him the sole survivor. Since then, he'd abandoned the skies, living in the shadow of guilt. When the UN called, he'd agreed without hesitation, not for glory, but for a chance at redemption. "What's this pile of junk?" Elias said as he caught sight of the Zylara-7. His deep voice tinged with curiosity. He stood beside Amara, hands in his pockets, the desert wind tugging at his worn leather jacket. "It's the future," Amara replied, not looking at him. "If we get it right." Before Elias could argue, another voice cut through the air from behind. "I hope it's more than just dead metal. I flew halfway around the world for this." Lina Torres strode up, a petite woman with black hair tied high and eyes blazing with determination. At 29, she was a biotech genius, but an outcast in the scientific community. Her invention, the Neural Response Network, a system that linked human minds directly to machines, had been mocked as cheap sci-fi nonsense. Lina was here to prove them wrong, though her gaze held a hint of defensiveness as she sized up Amara and Elias. "Biotech?" Elias raised an eyebrow. skepticism clear in his tone. "What are you planning? Sticking a brain in this thing?" Lena smirked. "If I have to. But I figure we can do better than that." Amara stepped in before the bickering escalated. "Enough. We don't have time to squabble. Come inside, I'll show you what we're dealing with." Within the ZYLARA-7, the air remained cold and carried that peculiar cinnamon metal scent. Amara led Elias and Lena through the vast corridors, the faint purple glow from the walls reflecting off their faces. Tabo trailed behind, flashlight in hand, jotting notes on his tablet. They paused in a large chamber, likely the control center, where a colossal chair sat at the heart, clearly designed for a being twice human size. On the console, rows of Kateseth symbols flickered dimly, and some machinery hummed faintly despite no obvious power source. "This is where they left it," Amara said, pointing to the translation device she and Tabo had found. She activated it, and the holographic display flared to life again. Vessel ZYLARA-7. Irreparably damaged. Abandoned per protocol. The Kateseth, that's what they call themselves, seem to have considered this ship trash. Elias crossed his arms, glancing around. "If it's so busted they couldn't fix it, how are we supposed to?" "Because we're not them," Amara said firmly. "I've dug deeper into this device's data. The Kateseth have a strict philosophy. Everything must be perfect, or it's worthless. The ship's power core is damaged. Its propulsion system's dead, but parts of it are still alive. They didn't want to waste resources fixing it, so they dumped it." Lena stepped closer to the control chair, her fingers brushing the cold metal surface. "Perfect or useless? Sounds like the jerks on the research council who booted me from my last project." She turned to Amara. "If I hook my neural response network into this, I could learn more. Maybe we don't have to fix it their way. We can make it work our way." Elias snorted. "You want to talk to this thing? I've seen enough machines turn on me without adding one that thinks." "It's not about thinking," Lena shot back. "It's about feeling. If I'm right, we can control it with instinct, not just buttons." Amara raised a hand to stop them. "Both ideas have merit, but first, we need a name. ZYLARA-7 belongs to the Kateseth. If this is our chance, it should carry humanity's mark." Tabo looked up from his tablet. "I've got one. Out here in the desert, vultures are a symbol of life from death. They take what's left behind and turn it into strength. How about Vulture?" Amara smiled for the first time in days. "Vulture. I like it. It says it all. We'll make this thing fly again." From the wreckage, that night, after Elias and Lena had retired to their tents, Amara stood alone in the desert, gazing at the sky. Vulture loomed under the floodlights, its dark silhouette blotting out a swath of stars. She thought of her father, of the nights he'd pointed out the Aquila constellation and said, "The universe always has answers, if you dare to ask." Now, the question lay right before her. A discarded ship, an alien civilization, and an oddball team of dreamers. Elias might doubt, Lena might be eccentric, but Amara believed they were the pieces she needed. She whispered to the wind, "You were right, Dad, and we'll fly, no matter what they think." Chapter 3. The Hybrid Heart. A month had passed since Vulture earned its name, and the Karoo Desert had morphed into a colossal hive of activity. Towering cranes rose around the ship, hoisting massive Kateseth metal panels weighing tons to give engineers access to its innards. The clamor of drills and shouts of workers rang out day and night. Mingling with the dry desert wind, Dr. Amara and Lovu stood on a scaffold, peering down at Vulture's main engine chamber. The power core, a 20-meter-tall column that once blazed brilliantly, according to the logs, was now dark, with only a few faint purple sparks flickering like the last breaths of a dying beast. "We've figured out about 30% of its tech," Tabo Quavadas reported, standing beside Amara with his tablet in hand. He wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of red dust. "But this core, it's like a puzzle with no solution. The Kateseth used something way beyond our physics." Amara nodded, her gaze fixed on the column. She'd pored over the Kateseth logs repeatedly. The core had been damaged in a cosmic battle, perhaps against an enemy humanity had never encountered. The Kateseth had abandoned it because they couldn't replace it. But Amara refused to accept, giving up. She turned to Lena Torres, who sat on a nearby toolbox. attaching leads to a small helmet-like device. Lena, is your network ready? Lena looked up, her eyes gleaming despite her oil-streaked face. Almost there. If I link it to the control systems, I can feel what's left in that core. But I need someone brave enough to test it with me. Colonel Elias Voss stepped forward from behind, arms crossed, his voice low. I'm not thrilled about sticking my head in some alien machine. But if it'll help me figure out how to fly this thing, I'm in. Amara gave a small smile. Elias still wore his trademark skepticism. But she could tell he was starting to believe in the project, just a little. The test took place in Vulture's main control chamber. Lena fitted the device, the neural response network, onto her head. Its hair-thin leads connecting to her scalp. A small screen nearby displayed her brainwaves. Dancing with each heartbeat, Elias stood close, watching warily, while Tabo tweaked the monitoring gear. Okay, Lena said, her voice quivering slightly. I'm activating it. If I'm right, the network will show me what Vulture went through, and maybe how it works. Amara nodded, but a familiar unease crept up inside her. She remembered the explosion that killed her father, a rocket experiment gone wrong due to a tiny miscalculation. If this failed, she could lose everything. Lena pressed a button, and instantly, her eyes snapped shut, her body stiffened. Then she whispered, I see light, a battle, other ships, firing red beams. The core took a hit, it shattered from the inside. Her voice wavered, as if she were reliving the moment. The Kateseth, they couldn't fix it. They didn't even try. Elias furrowed his brow. You're saying it's got memories? Not memories, Lena replied, opening her eyes, breathing hard. Emotional data. Their systems aren't just machines, they respond to the crew. But when the core broke, they severed the connection and walked away. Amara stepped forward, gripping the console. So what can we do with the core? Tabo raised a hand. I've got an idea. We can't fix the Kateseth core. But I've built a hybrid, Earth nuclear fusion tech mixed with their materials. It's not as powerful, but it might be enough to restart the ship. Lena nodded. And with my network, we could control it without needing their perfect systems. Elias snorted. Sounds like a crazy plan. But I've seen crazier stuff work. That afternoon, the team installed the hybrid core in the engine bay. It was smaller than the Kateseth original. A rough metallic sphere rather than an elegant column. But Tabo was confident it would hold. The other engineers, a mix of Russians, Indians, and Brazilians, worked tirelessly, welding leads and checking pressure levels. Amara oversaw from a distance. But she couldn't shake her growing dread. When the core activated, a small explosion rocked the chamber. Black smoke billowed out, and João, a Brazilian engineer, screamed as a shard of red-hot metal burned his hand. The rescue team rushed in, pulling him clear, while Tabo scrambled to shut the system down. Amara ran over, her heart pounding. What happened? She shouted. The core's unstable, Tabo said, his face pale. I misjudged the pressure, it's too strong for the Kateseth materials. João was whisked away for treatment, and Amara stood frozen, staring at the blackened scorch mark on the floor. It was like looking into the past, the explosion that took her father replayed in her mind. The sound of shattering glass. Her mother's screams over the phone. What have I done? She wondered, her hands trembling. Elias approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. He'll be okay, but we've got to be more careful. This isn't a toy. Amara nodded, but a storm raged inside her. She'd vowed not to repeat her father's mistakes. Yet here she was, leading her team into danger. That night, Elias sat in his tent, holding an old photo, his squadron, beaming before their doomed Arctic mission. He'd lost them to a single bad call, and now he was trusting a new team with wild ideas like hybrid cores and neural networks. He wanted to believe in Amara, in Lena, but the fear of failure gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Lena kept working on her network, tweaking it based on the test data. She didn't tell anyone, but she'd felt something in Vulture, a yearning, as if the ship longed to live again. She knew people saw her as a weirdo, but this time, she'd prove her worth. The next day, Tabo returned with a modified hybrid core, its pressure dialed back and insulation reinforced. I've fixed it, he told Amara. Give me one more shot. Amara looked at him, then at Vulture. She took a deep breath, shoving her fear aside. All right, but this time, we go slow. When the core fired up again, there was no explosion. Instead, a low rumble rose from deep within the ship. The purple lights along the walls flared brighter, spreading like veins coming back to life. Vulture shuddered, not from failure, but from awakening. Amara stood there, eyes wide. We did it, she whispered, but as she glanced at the burn mark from the day before, a question lingered in her mind. Are we pushing too far? Chapter 4. The First Flight. The Karoo Desert glowed under the dawn light, the first rays of sun glinting off Vulture like a beckoning call. After the small explosion a week earlier, Amara's team had worked tirelessly to refine Tabo's hybrid core and Lena's neural response network. The ship now looked more alive than ever. Faint purple light pulsed steadily from the slits in its hull, like the heartbeat of a giant stirring from slumber. Today was the big test, the first flight. Amara stood on a scaffold, hands gripping the railing, her eyes trained on the control chamber below where Elias Voss checked the pilot's seat. The original Kateseth chair, far too large for humans, had been replaced with a smaller version, fitted with levers and buttons Elias had requested. She took a deep breath, trying to banish memories of Joao's accident. He'd recovered, but the scar on his hand still reminded her of the cost of mistakes. Hey, Amara, you okay? Tabo approached, tablet in hand, his voice tinged with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. Amara managed a faint smile. I'm fine, Tabo, just nervous. Today has to work. It will, he said, flashing a wide grin. My hybrid core's ready. No explosions this time. I swear. You swore last time too. Amara teased, though her eyes softened. Tabo might be young and impulsive, but he was the heart of the tech team. Down below, Elias looked up from the cockpit, his voice booming through a loudspeaker. Hey, you lot up there, done yet? I'm not sitting here all day. Lena, standing by the engine bay with her network device in hand, shouted back. Chill out, old man. I'm hooking it up now. If you hate waiting, come down and do it yourself. Elias muttered something under his breath but didn't argue. Amara noticed he was starting to get used to the team's chaos, and maybe even liked it. The test began at 7 a.m. Elias sat in the cockpit, hands on the controls, eyes locked on a console blending Kateseth symbols with Earth screens. Lena stood in the engine bay, her neural response network glowing on her head, its leads lighting up as she synced with the hybrid core. Amara and Tabo watched from a makeshift command center, a large tent filled with monitors and gear. All right, everyone, listen up, Elias said over the comms, his tone deep and steady. I'm taking her up 50 meters, doing a short loop, then bringing her down. Anything weird happens, yell right away. Got it? Got it, Colonel, Tabo replied, fingers tapping furiously on his tablet. Course steady at 68% power. Plenty to fly. Lena, how you holding? Amara asked through the comms. My head's a bit warm. Lena answered, her voice sharp but edged with excitement. The network's live. I can feel Vulture. It wants to fly. Amara, it really does. Elias huffed over the comms. Spare me the goosebumps talk. Here we go. He pulled the lever, and Vulture trembled. A deep, resonant growl rose from the hybrid core, rippling across the desert. Sand and dust swirled as the massive ship lifted off, 10 meters. Then 20. Amara held her breath, eyes glued to the monitors. The readings held steady, but she couldn't shake her unease. Looking good, Elias, Tabo cheered. 50 meters. Yeah, I see it, Elias said, his calm voice betraying a hint of pride. She's heavy as an elephant, but she's responding. I'm gonna try a lateral move. The ship tilted slightly, tracing a slow circle around the test site. The engineers below clapped, but Amara spotted trouble. The power readings on her screen flashed red. Lena, what's the core doing? She shouted into the comms. It's overloading, Lena replied, panic creeping into her voice. It's past 90%. I can't hold it much longer. Elias, bring her down now, Amara ordered. I'm trying, Elias barked back, but she's not listening. It's like she wants to keep going. Amara bolted out of the tent, staring up at Vulture. The ship shook hard, white smoke billowing from the engine bay. Elias gritted his teeth, wrestling the controls, but it refused to descend. continuing its loop. Lena, do something. Amara yelled through the comms. I'm on it, Lena shot back. In the engine bay, she closed her eyes. Focusing on the network, she felt Vulture, not just machinery, but something alive, angry at being abandoned. Easy now, she whispered. We're not leaving you. Come down. The hybrid core shuddered violently. But then, as if hearing her, it eased. The purple lights dimmed, and Vulture slowly sank, touching down just meters from its starting point. Dust kicked up as it landed, and the team fell silent for a moment. Elias stepped out of the cockpit, sweat dripping down his face. Damn near lost it, he said, glancing at Amara. But she flew. Lena burst from the engine bay, yanking off the network, panting. I saved her, so thank me already, she said, flashing a tired grin. Amara approached, her hands still shaking. Thanks, both of you, but we need to fix this. She's not stable yet. That afternoon, Amara presented the results via video to the United Nations. Footage of Vulture rising, even briefly, sent the delegates buzzing, but not everyone was impressed. This thing's a hazard, the Russian representative said over the screen. It nearly blew up. We should destroy it before the Katseth come back for it. No, Amara countered, her voice firm. We made it fly. That's the first step. Give us time. The American delegate frowned. Time's something we don't have. If the Katseth see us using their ship, they might take it as a declaration of war. The debate dragged on for hours. But eventually, the UN agreed to let the project continue, on the condition of clear results within 3 months. Amara switched off the screen, exhaling heavily. The pressure had just doubled. Back at Vulture, Tabo was reviewing flight data. Amara, I found something in the system, he said, pointing at the screen. A star map appeared. Points of light linked into a path leading to a distant system. 40 light years from Earth. The Katseth home? Amara asked, eyes widening. Maybe, Tabo replied, but if they come back, we've got to be ready. Elias walked in, catching the last bit. She flies. Amara, he said, his voice low, but she's not ours yet. Not quite. Amara gazed at Vulture, now silent under the sunset. She knew he was right. They'd brought it back to life. But to truly claim it, they needed more. Chapter 5. The Visitor's Return. 3 months had passed since Vulture's first flight, and the Karoo Desert now resembled a space base more than a wasteland. Sleek radar towers jutted up among the tents, and hundreds of scientists and engineers from around the globe worked day and night to perfect the ship. Dr. Amara and Lovu stood in the command center, staring at a massive radar screen. Vulture's stats had steadied. Tabo's hybrid core ran at 75% capacity, and Lena's neural response network allowed for sharper control. But Amara couldn't shake her unease. The star map Tabo had uncovered haunted her. If the Katseth returned, would humanity be ready? Amara, you should take a break, Tabo said, stepping in with a coffee mug in hand. You look like a zombie. No time, Amara replied, her eyes still on the screen. The UN wants a report by the end of the week. If we don't prove Vulture's worth, they'll pull funding. Tabo shrugged. She's flying fine now. Yesterday, Elias took her up 200 meters. Smooth as silk. Amara gave a faint smile. Flying's one thing. Surviving the Katseth is another. Before Tabo could respond, a shrill alarm blared from the radar. The screen flashed red, and a technician shouted, "We've got signals. Multiple objects, closing in from Mars." Amara rushed over, her heart hammering. Put it on the main screen. The image appeared. 5 enormous ships, twice Vulture's size, their hulls gleaming like black crystal, moving at impossible speed. They weren't anything Earth had seen before, not satellites, not probes. Amara knew instantly. The Katseth were back. The command center erupted into chaos. Technicians yelled into comms, contacting the South African military and the UN. Amara turned to Tabo. Get Elias and Lena here now. We need Vulture ready. Half an hour later, Elias Voss and Lena Torres burst in, still in oil-stained coveralls. Elias glanced at the screen, frowning. Damn, they move fast. What's their game? No idea, Amara said, but they sent a message. Those using ZYLARA7 Show yourselves immediately or be erased. Lena smirked, though her voice wavered. They're not happy we're playing with their old toy. Huh? Not the time for jokes. Elias snapped. If they want a fight. Vulture's not up for it. Amara took a deep breath. We don't have a choice. If we don't face them, they'll come here. Elias, you fly. Lena, prep the network. I'm coming with you. Elias met her gaze, his eyes hard. You sure? This isn't a test run anymore. I'm sure, Amara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. We brought Vulture back. Now we show them. Vulture launched from the Karoo with a thunderous roar. The hybrid core growling like a beast roused from sleep. Elias sat in the cockpit, hands tight on the controls, eyes fixed on the radar. Lena stood in the engine bay, her network glowing on her head, syncing her to the ship. Amara stood on the bridge, peering through the large window at the 5 Katseth ships hovering near Mars. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, flawless lines, unmarred surfaces, as if forged from darkness itself. Patch me into comms, Amara said over the radio. A technician nodded, and the main screen flickered, revealing an alien figure. It was tall and gaunt, with gray-green skin, 4 long arms, and 6 eyes rolling independently on a mouthless face. Vibrating membranes at its neck produced sound, instantly translated into English by Vulture's system. I am Admiral Vraxis of the Katseth fleet. The cold voice declared. You are operating ZYLARA-7, a decommissioned asset. Explain, or be eradicated. Amara stepped closer to the screen, forcing her voice calm. I'm Dr. Amara Enlovu from Earth. We found this ship abandoned on our planet 3 months ago. It was broken, but we fixed it, our way. Vraxis's eyes spun, as if appraising her. Repaired? ZYLARA-7 was deemed useless. Our technology tolerates no flaws. How could you succeed? Lena cut in, her tone brash. We don't toss stuff out just 'cause it's not perfect. We made it work again, with creativity. Not your rigid rules. Elias muttered over the comms. Lena, cool it, don't piss them off. But Vraxis didn't react to the jab. Instead, his eyes locked on Amara. Creativity? An alien concept, yet I see you've made it fly. This is unexpected. Amara seized the opening. We don't want war. We want to understand, and prove humanity can stand with you. Vraxis fell silent, his membranes trembling faintly. Then he spoke. Words are insufficient. Action is proof. ZYLARA-7 will face Stormspire, our mightiest vessel, in 3 trials. Speed, combat, and endurance. Win, and we'll consider your species worth. Lose, and you'll be erased from this galaxy. Elias turned to Amara, his voice low. They're not messing around. Vulture isn't ready for this. We'll make her ready, Amara said, though doubt churned inside her. We've got no choice. Lena laughed over the comms. Love it. I'll show him how they're useless junk flies. Vraxis tilted his head, as if intrigued. You have 3 Earth days to prepare. Meet us at these coordinates. The screen went dark, and a set of numbers appeared, a point between Earth and Mars. When Vulture touched down back at the Karoo, the team was quiet. Elias stepped out of the cockpit, wiping sweat from his brow. They're testing us, he said, looking at Amara. Lose. And it's not just Vulture that's done. Earth goes with it. Amara nodded, her gaze drifting to the horizon where the Katseth waited. She thought of her father. He died to push humanity toward the stars. And now she faced those who came from them. I know, she said, but if we win, we don't just survive, we get recognized. Lena joined them, her network still glowing in her hand. They're already surprised. Bet they haven't seen the half of it yet. Tabo, nearby, held up his tablet. 3 days. We need to boost the core, up the speed, and prep for combat. Where do we start? Amara inhaled deeply, pushing her fear down. Everywhere. We'll turn Vulture into something they never saw coming. Under a star-filled sky, Vulture stood silent, its purple lights pulsing like a challenge. The Katseth had arrived, and now it was humanity's turn to answer. Chapter 6. The Trials of Fire. 3 days after Admiral Vraxis's challenge, Vulture blasted out of Earth's atmosphere, leaving a fiery streak across the Karoo sky. In the cockpit, Elias Voss gripped the controls, His eyes locked on the radar where 5 Katseth ships waited at the rendezvous point between Earth and Mars. Lena Torres stood in the engine bay, her neural response network glowing brightly on her head, hands trembling slightly as she tweaked the hybrid core. Dr. Amara and Lovu stood on the bridge, peering through the wide window at Stormspire, the Katseth flagship. A sleek black monolith twice Vulture's length, its edges sharp as a blade. "Look at that thing," Elias said over the comms, his voice low, fresh off the assembly line. "While we're flying a scrap heap." "A scrap heap that flies." Lena shot back, smirking. "Let me juice up the core a bit more. They're in for a surprise." Amara turned to the comm screen. "Don't push it too far. Lena, we need Vulture to last all 3 trials." But deep down, she knew they had little room for caution. The Katseth outclassed them in every way. And this was their only shot to prove humanity's worth. The screen flickered, and Vraxis's alien face appeared. "The trials commence," he said, his cold voice cutting through the translation system. "Speed first. From here to Mars orbit and back. Prepare." Elias clenched his jaw. "Hold on tight, everyone. Here we go. Speed trial." When the signal sounded, Vulture and Stormspire surged forward. Stormspire moved with fluid grace, a black arrow slicing through space, while Vulture shuddered violently as the hybrid core strained to its limits. Elias kept his hands steady, feeling every jolt through the seat. "We're falling behind," Tabo shouted over the comms from the Karoo command center. "Tracking via radar. They're 20% faster already." "Lena, do something," Elias roared. "I'm trying." Lena snapped, her voice taut. She closed her eyes, focusing on the network. She sensed Vulture, not just machinery, but something alive, aching to push beyond its bounds. "You can go faster," she whispered. "I know you can." She triggered a new core configuration, a reckless idea she and Tabo had tested the night before. Bypassing several safety protocols, the core roared, purple light flaring through Vulture's seams. The ship lurched forward, pressure crushing its hull, which groaned audibly. "God damn, it's working," Elias exclaimed as Vulture caught up to Stormspire. "But I hear something. Can the hull take it?" "Probably," Lena yelled back, though she wasn't sure. "Just keep flying." They passed Mars orbit, swung around, and Vulture surged ahead, cutting across Stormspire's path. As they crossed the finish line, the radar showed Vulture ahead by 3 seconds, a slim margin, but enough to leave Vraxis silent on the screen. "What the hell just happened?" Elias panted, releasing the controls. "I thought she'd break apart." Lena laughed over the comms. "Told you. Our scrap heaps got soul." Amara smiled, but her hands clenched the chair's edge. They'd won, but at what cost? Combat trial. The second trial began immediately, a simulated battle. No real weapons fired, but sensors on both ships logged hits from targeting systems. Stormspire attacked with lethal precision, its mock beams striking Vulture repeatedly. "We've lost shields," Tabo reported from the Karoo. "They're locking on too fast." "Lena, boost the power," Elias shouted, twisting the controls to dodge the next volley. "There's not enough juice," Lena replied. "The core's drained from the speed run." Elias gritted his teeth. He flashed back to his fighter pilot days, not in space, but Earth's skies, dodging bullets on instinct. "Fine. If they want to play, we'll play our way." He threw Vulture into a barrel roll, a lunatic move borrowed from jet combat. Not spacecraft. The ship tilted hard, its hull creaking, but Stormspire's targeting system lost lock. Elias pressed on, feinting a crash, diving low, then snapping up to return fire with sensors. "What the hell's this?" Lena yelped over the comms as she slammed into a wall. "You trying to kill us all?" "Nope, I'm winning." Elias grinned back. "They don't know how to handle this." When the trial ended, the sensors showed Vulture ahead by 5 points, a razor-thin victory, but enough to make Vraxis tilt his head on the screen. "Tactics, unconventional," he said, "but effective." Amara exhaled, but she knew the final trial would be the toughest. Endurance trial. The last challenge was endurance. Both ships had to maintain top speed and perform complex maneuvers for 3 hours, pushing every system to the brink. Stormspire ran flawlessly, showing no strain, but Vulture started shaking after just 1 hour. Red alert. Lena cried from the engine bay. The hybrid core's overheating. We've got to slow down. Slow down. And we lose. Elias shot back, his voice tight. He glanced at the screen. Stormspire glided on. Tireless. Amara raced to the engine bay, finding Lena struggling with the network. Lena, any options? Not if we keep this pace, Lena said, sweat streaming down her face. She'll blow. Elias heard her over the comms, and a decision sparked in his mind. He thought of his Arctic team. He'd survived by taking risks, though it cost him everything. I'm going down there, he said. I'll tweak the core manually. Are you nuts? Amara shouted. The radiation will kill you. Only if I stay too long, Elias replied, abandoning the cockpit and sprinting to the engine bay. He forced open the safety door, stepping into a chamber pulsing with purple light and a deafening hum. Radiation seared his skin instantly, but he gritted his teeth, reaching the core's manual controls. Elias, stop, Amara yelled over the comms, but he ignored her. With shaking hands, he adjusted the energy flow, finding efficiencies the automated systems missed. The core steadied, its whine softening, and Vulture kept flying. He stayed for 20 minutes, far past safe limits, before collapsing. Gasping. When the trial ended, both ships were still operational. Stormspire was pristine, as expected, but Vulture, battered and trembling, had endured a tie. Elias was dragged from the engine bay, his face pale from radiation. Amara rushed over, helping him sit. You're insane, she said, her voice breaking. But we didn't lose, Elias replied, managing a weak smile. Told you. This scrap heap can take anything. The screen flickered, and Vraxis appeared. His eyes were still, a sign of deep surprise the team would later recognize. You are not perfect, he said, but you cannot be broken. The council will evaluate this outcome. As the screen went dark, Lena pulled off her network, laughing. They don't know what to do with us. Amara looked at Elias, then at Vulture. They'd won too, tied one, not a total victory, but enough to make the Kateseth think twice. She thought of her father, he'd be proud. But she also knew this win had cost Elias's life. Slowly fading away. Chapter 7. The Galactic Verdict. After the grueling 3 trials against Stormspire, Vulture returned to Earth, touching down in the Karoo Desert amid the team's applause. But the air in the command center hung heavy. Elias Voss lay on a stretcher, his face ashen from the radiation he'd endured in the hybrid core. His breaths shallow yet his eyes still sharp. Dr. Amara Enlovu stood beside him, clutching a tablet, her mind a tangle of emotions. They'd survived, won 2 trials, tied 1, but at what cost? Lena Torres sat nearby, peeling the neural response network from her head, sweat-soaked but grinning. Tabo Quavadas darted between monitors, checking Vulture's data, trying to keep spirits high. Elias, you okay? Amara asked, her voice soft but laced with worry. Elias managed a faint smirk. Better than those guys I flew with in the Arctic. Don't worry, I'm too stubborn to quit. You didn't have to do that, Amara said, her eyes welling up. I told you to stop. And let us lose? Elias replied, his voice weak but firm. I owed my old team a win. Debts paid now. Before Amara could say more, the main screen flickered. Admiral Vraxis's alien face appeared, his 6 eyes rolling slowly, as if weighing something. The team fell silent, awaiting the Kateseth's judgment. The Galactic Council has reviewed the trials, Vraxis said, his cold tone cutting through the translation system. Humanity is classified as Category 3, adaptive. You are granted limited interstellar trade and travel. Under our oversight, Amara let out a breath. But she knew there was more. Lena jumped up. Adaptive? That's badass. No more calling us useless. Lena, hush. Elias rasped from the stretcher, though he chuckled faintly. Vraxis continued, his neck membranes quivering slightly. But there is a condition. You achieved the impossible with ZYLARA7, turned a useless relic into a tool. The Council is intrigued. I propose an alliance. 5 Kateseth engineers will come to Earth, and 5 of your scientists will visit our star system. We wish to understand how you think. The command center went quiet. Tabo turned to Amara, eyes gleaming. They want to learn from us? That's unreal. Amara didn't answer right away. She studied Vraxis, trying to read emotion in those strange eyes. This was an opportunity, not just to survive, but to step into the galaxy as partners. Not weaklings, yet she saw risks. The Kateseth might exploit their tech, or worse, see them as a bigger threat later. I'll go, she said, her voice steady. If you need someone for your system, I volunteer. Amara, are you crazy? Lena cut in, leaping to her feet. You're the boss here. Who's gonna lead us if you leave? You will, Amara replied, meeting Lena's gaze. Your network saved Vulture. I trust you. Lena hesitated, then nodded, though her eyes betrayed unease. Fine, but if they snag my network, I'm coming to get it back. Elias raised a shaky hand. I'm staying. Someone's got to teach the kids how to fly these things. Right? Amara smiled, but her chest tightened. Elias was fading fast. The radiation had ravaged him, and she knew his time was short. Vraxis tilted his head on the screen. Your decision is accepted. Our ship will arrive in 3 Earth days to finalize the agreement. Prepare. The screen went blank, and the command center buzzed with chatter. Some engineers clapped, but Amara stood still, gazing at Vulture through the window. She thought of her father. He dreamed of humanity reaching the stars. And now she'd walk among them. But this dream's price was Elias, and risks she couldn't foresee. That night, Amara sat by Elias in the medical tent. He lay on a bed, the heart monitor beeping steadily but faintly. You don't have to go, Elias said, his voice hoarse. You've done enough. Not enough, Amara replied, holding his hand. We beat the Kateseth, but this is just the start. I want to see them, understand them. Dad would have wanted it. Elias chuckled weakly. You're too much like him. Stubborn, never stopping. Amara bowed her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't want to lose you. Elias, not after everything. You won't, he said, squeezing her hand faintly. I'll stick around, teaching the kids, till I can't. You go. Take Vulture out there. Show the galaxy who we are. She nodded, unable to speak. Elias had redeemed his past, and now she had to carry their dream forward. The next morning, Lena and Tabo prepped for the Kateseth's arrival. Lena checked her network, worried the Kateseth might copy it, but excited by the prospect of collaboration. If they want to learn from me, I'll learn from them too, she told Tabo. Their tech's gorgeous, but it's got no soul. Tabo laughed. Souls are specialty. They won't know what hit him. Amara stood outside Vulture, taking one last look before leaving. It wasn't Zylara7 anymore, it was Vulture. A symbol of life from ruin. She thought of Elias, her father, and all they'd sacrificed to get here. We flew, she whispered. Now it's time to explore. 3 days later, a Kateseth ship landed in the Karoo, not a warship, but a sleek diplomatic vessel shimmering like black pearl. Vraxis emerged, his 4 arms spread wide, eyes spinning as he surveyed the crowd. Amara stepped forward, carrying a small suitcase and a burning resolve. Welcome to Earth, she said, her voice calm. We're ready. Vraxis tilted his head, as if curious. And we are ready to receive you. Let us see what the galaxy makes of your adaptive kind. As the Kateseth ship lifted off, carrying Amara away, she glanced through the window at Vulture one final time. It stood there, battered but proud, a reminder that humanity didn't just survive, they forged miracles from the discarded. Chapter 8. The Legacy of the Vulture. A year had passed since Dr. Amara and Lovu left Earth aboard the Kateseth ship, leaving Vulture and her team in the hands of those who remained. The Karoo Desert was now a true space hub, no longer a patchwork of tents, but a sprawling complex of steel and glass rising from the red sand. Vulture stood at its heart, upgraded with new hull plates and stronger systems, yet retaining its weathered scars, a testament to its origins. Children from across South Africa visited daily, gazing up at the ship with dreamy eyes, while new pilots and engineers trained to carry on the journey Amara, Elias, Lena, and Tabo had begun. Elias Voss stood on an outdoor platform, clad in his old pilot's jacket, his deep voice carrying through a microphone, thinner than before, his hair nearly all silver from the radiation of the endurance trial. His eyes still burned with intensity. Before him sat dozens of young trainees, Earth's future pilots, hanging on his every word. Vulture isn't just a ship, Elias said, pointing to the massive metal hulk behind him. It's proof we can take what's discarded and turn it into something extraordinary. I flew her through 3 trials against the Katseth, and I'll be honest, there were moments I thought I'd die. But we made it, because we don't give up. A trainee raised her hand. A petite girl with a ponytail. Colonel, is it true the Katseth saw it as trash? They ditched it just because it was broken? Elias gave a faint smile, coughing softly. Yeah, kid, they called it Zylara-7, and when its core failed, they tossed it like a car out of gas. But we're not like them. We see potential in the wreckage. That's the biggest lesson. Never underestimate what others leave behind. The crowd clapped, and Elias sat down, catching his breath. He knew his time was running out, but he was content. He'd redeemed his old team's loss, and now he was passing on a legacy. Nearby, in a lab, Lena Torres worked with 5 Katseth engineers, tall, gaunt beings with 4 arms and spinning eyes. They'd arrived on Earth under Vraxis's deal, bringing their tech to trade. Lena stood before a control panel, her neural response network glowing in her hand, explaining how she'd linked human minds to Vulture. Check this out, she said, her voice brimming with excitement. You guys build perfect systems. Everything precise. We're different. We let emotions guide us. And it works. A Katseth engineer, Clythar, tilted his head, eyes whirling curiously. Emotion is an unreliable variable, he said through a translator. Why rely on it? Lena laughed. Because it's what makes us us. Your tech's beautiful, but cold. Ours is alive, it reacts. It learns. Look at Vulture. She flew because we believed in her. Clythar paused, then nodded. A rare gesture for a Katseth. Lena knew she was shifting their perspective. Bit by bit, she'd refined the network, making it standard for Earth's new ships. And now she was teaching the Katseth to feel machines. She thought of Amara, wondering what she was up to in that distant star system. Tabo Quavatis, now chief engineer of the Vulture Ascent project, stood in a fabrication bay, overseeing the construction of a new ship, Eagle, blending Katseth tech with human flair. No longer the young assistant. At 25 he was one of Earth's brightest minds. Yet he kept his easy grin, even working 18-hour days. Lena, come see this, Tabo called, pointing to a new hybrid power core. I mixed Katseth designs with our old core. It's 30% stronger than Vulture's. Lena walked over, nodding. Looks solid. Just don't let it blow up like the first one. I'm not running around the desert to save you again. Tabo laughed. No chance. I've got it locked down this time. As they worked, a signal pinged through the comms system. Tabo flipped on the screen, and Amara's face appeared, slightly fuzzy from the distance, but clear. She wore an odd suit, likely Katseth made, standing in a room bathed in blue light. Amara, Lena cheered. You good? What's it like out there? Amara smiled, though her eyes showed fatigue. I'm fine. Lena, the Katseth system, it's beyond words. They're stunned by us, how we turned Vulture into something they never expected. But I told them. They haven't seen anything yet. Tabo jumped in. You've got to come back and tell us everything. Vulture's a legend now. I will, Amara said, but not yet. There's so much to learn here. Keep Vulture flying. It's our legacy. The screen went dark, and Lena glanced at Tabo. She's right. We're just getting started. Under the sunset, Elias stood in the desert, looking at Vulture one last time. He knew he wouldn't last much longer. The doctors said the radiation had eaten too deep. But he wasn't sad. He'd flown Vulture, beaten the Katseth, and now he was leaving a new generation to carry on. A kid ran up, clutching a wooden Vulture model. Colonel Voss, he called, eyes shining. I'm gonna fly her someday. Like you. Elias smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. Good on you, kid. But remember, it's not the ship that makes the pilot. It's the pilot that makes the ship. The boy nodded and dashed off, holding his model aloft like it was soaring. Elias watched, feeling peace for the first time in years. He'd lost his team in the Arctic, but now he'd handed his dream to those who'd follow. That night, as stars blazed over the Karoo, Vulture stood silent, its purple lights pulsing like a promise. It wasn't Zylara-7 anymore. It was humanity's symbol. Proof they could turn trash into treasure. Amara was exploring the galaxy. Elias had left his mark. And Lena and Tabo were building the future. Somewhere among the kids staring skyward, new explorers grew, dreaming of flying farther than the Kateseth ever imagined. On a small hill, the boy with the Vulture model sat down, gazing at the stars. "We won't stop," he whispered, "ever." The desert wind swept through, carrying red dust and humanity's dream, a dream born from wreckage, now reaching for the galaxy.